It's always the man who doesn't chase her, doesn't validate her, and doesn't flinch when she pulls away, who ends up living in her mind. And you wonder why she's addicted. In this video, we'll break down the psychology behind why women become obsessed with men who act like they're nothing, men who don't try, don't chase, and don't entertain emotional games. Because the truth is, being emotionally detached isn't weakness, it's power. And once you understand how to wield it, you stop becoming a memory. You become an obsession. The man who is detached is not the one who doesn't care. He's the one who doesn't depend. And that alone makes him dangerous in a world where everyone is addicted to validation, where constant reaction is the norm, where being emotionally predictable has become a form of submission. Detachment is not about being emotionally dead. It's about being emotionally in control. It's the quiet message that says, I'm good either way. Whether she comes close or walks away, the man in detachment doesn't flinch. He doesn't beg. He doesn't adjust his self-worth based on whether he gets affection or not. And that, to a woman, is unnerving because she's so used to men who chase, men who fold, men who perform for attention. When she meets one who doesn't, her mind can't categorize him. So instead, it clings to him. There's a kind of psychological weight that detachment carries. The man who walks into a room and doesn't need to be noticed becomes the one people notice most. The man who doesn't flood her with compliments, doesn't rush to reply, doesn't overexpress himself, becomes the one she starts watching. Not because he's withholding, but because he's centered in himself. He's not seeking approval. He's not waiting for her to react. His energy isn't reaching out. It's drawing inward. And that reversal of dynamic flips everything. Suddenly, she's the one wondering what he's thinking, wondering why he's not trying, wondering what makes him so calm when other men would be scrambling for attention. That's how detachment becomes value. It creates mystery, and mystery feeds obsession. You see, attachment is often misinterpreted as love, but real love doesn't suffocate. It doesn't demand presence every second. It doesn't over-explain or overcompensate. When a man is detached, he operates from abundance, not fear. He's not afraid of losing her because he was never trying to possess her in the first place. He's not afraid of silence because he's not addicted to noise. And he's not afraid of distance because he knows who he is, whether she stays or goes. That kind of emotional sovereignty is rare, and anything rare becomes desirable by default. When a woman senses that you are not driven by the need to be wanted, she starts wanting you more. Not because you manipulated her, but because she feels your strength without you needing to show it. This is why the men who act like she's nothing often become the ones who occupy her mind, because it's not about being cruel, it's about being unavailable to codependency. The average man believes he must prove his worth with effort, presence, attention. But the man of detachment understands value is not something you perform, it's something you are. And when you treat her like a normal person, not an idol, not a savior, not a fantasy, you level the playing field, you take away the pedestal, you break the illusion. And that forces her to interact with you on real terms, not from a place of ego, but from a place of curiosity. That's where the addiction begins, not in how much you chase her, but in how much you don't need to. Detachment doesn't mean you don't feel. It means your feelings don't control you. It means you're no longer performing emotional labor just to be seen. It means you've stopped worshiping her potential and started worshiping your peace. When she realizes that she's not your focal point, that your world doesn't revolve around her mood swings or attention, she begins to reposition herself in pursuit of the attention she she once took for granted. And in that subtle repositioning, she begins to value what she can no longer control, what she can no longer predict, what she can no longer hold without earning. Because what's not chasing her, what's not validating her every move, becomes the one thing she starts to want the most. Human psychology isn't built to be fascinated by what's easy to understand. We don't chase what's obvious. We chase what's confusing, layered, and mentally elusive. Women, especially those who are emotionally intelligent and used to being desired, are wired to lose interest in predictability. When a man is too emotionally available, too responsive, too eager, his pattern becomes familiar. And familiarity, while safe, rarely builds attraction. Attraction thrives in the unknown. It's born in the space between what's felt and what's withheld. When a man is unpredictable, not through immaturity or games, but through calculated restraint, he triggers something deeper in her. Mental curiosity. And that curiosity becomes the beginning of obsession. A woman doesn't become addicted to a man because he's always kind, always present, or always romantic. She becomes addicted because he doesn't give her a pattern to predict. One day he's warm, the next, he's focused. One day, he leans in. The next, he pulls back, not out of manipulation, but because his life is not centered around her availability. His behavior isn't based on how she feels. It's based on what he values. And that disarms her. She doesn't know how to place him. She doesn't know when he'll call or if he even will. She doesn't know what he's thinking when he goes silent. And in that uncertainty, she starts searching, not for him, but for answers. This is what most men never understand. It's not the presence that triggers desire. It's the tension built in the absence of clarity. Predictability tells her everything too soon. It gives her control over how the dynamic plays out. But unpredictability rewires her focus. Now she's not just responding, she's investing. She's checking her phone. She's analyzing the last conversation. She's replaying his tone in her head. Was he into me? Why didn't he ask to see me again? What did he mean by that look? She becomes consumed by her own overthinking, not because he played a game, but because he gave her nothing to cling to. That emotional void creates internal chaos, and the only way she feels she can resolve it is by chasing him more. A man who is emotionally unpredictable, not unstable, but centered in his own rhythm, becomes the most difficult to walk away from. Why? Because she never fully figured him out. Because he never laid himself out like an open book. Because he gave her glimpses, not chapters. He made her feel something, then pulled back into his purpose. That push and pull, when done with control and balance, creates a powerful, energetic imprint in her mind. The brain craves patterns, but when it can't find one, it becomes obsessed with trying. And that obsession makes him feel irreplaceable, not because of what he gives her, but because of what he withholds with power and poise. This is where most men collapse. They believe the more consistent, the more vocal, the more expressive they are, the more a woman will value them. But emotional saturation kills curiosity. When you explain everything, when you express everything, when you respond to every mood, you become predictable. And once she can anticipate your next move, your next reply, your next attempt to impress her, the chase dies. You become safe, comfortable. And comfort is not what creates emotional addiction. Emotional addiction is born in the unknown. It's fed by uncertainty. It grows in silence. It accelerates through restraint. So when a man pulls back without explanation, when he pauses instead of reacting, when he listens without affirming, he becomes harder to read. And what's hard to read becomes hard to release, because even if she tries to move on, the lack of closure, the mental what if, and the emotional suspense he left behind keeps circling in her mind. Not because he did too much, but because he revealed just enough to make her want more. In a world where attention is handed out like candy, where dopamine is served through likes, messages, and constant validation, a man who is scarce becomes a disruption to her nervous system. He becomes the one thing she can't figure out, can't reach when she wants, can't predict, and can't fully possess. And the truth is, people always want what they can't easily access. The human mind is biologically wired to assign more value to what is less available. The less something is given, the more it is wanted. That's how the scarcity principle works, not just in business or luxury goods, but in emotional dynamics too. When a man is emotionally and energetically scarce, not because he's playing games, but because his focus is not dependent on her validation, he transforms into a mental fixation, not because he's loud, present, or constantly proving his worth, but because his absence creates more tension than most men's presence ever could. It's the simple law of supply and demand. What's always there gets taken for granted. What's rare becomes expensive, not because it changes in quality, but because it changes in availability. The man who doesn't text her all day, who doesn't show up every time she calls, who doesn't pour endless emotion onto her just to gain favor, he becomes rare. And that emotional rarity triggers a primitive part of the brain that starts to panic. Why is he not seeking me? Why is he not reacting? Why is his attention so unpredictable? Her mind starts filling in blanks, writing stories, building fantasies, not because he gave her something, but because he gave her less. And in that lack, in that perceived void, a deeper desire is born, not to connect, but to chase, not to love, but to conquer. This is something most men never tap into because they confuse being emotionally present with being emotionally generous. But generosity, when offered too quickly, becomes pressure, and pressure suffocates desire. The man who is scarce is not cold. He's not cruel. He's just unavailable by default because his time, his energy, his attention, and his emotional intimacy are earned, not gifted. She cannot just exist and receive it. She must qualify. And that reversal of effort, that challenge to earn access, becomes intoxicating to the feminine mind because suddenly it's not about what he can give her. It's about what she must do to keep his attention. And when she starts shifting into that frame, everything changes. He becomes the prize. And she becomes the one trying to solve the puzzle. Scarcity also amplifies every interaction. When he does speak, she listens more closely. When he compliments her, she replays it in her head. When he shows up, it feels like a moment, not a routine, because he's not always there. And things that are rare are remembered. Things that are rare are valued. The man who is always available, always accessible, always reacting, becomes invisible over time. He fades into the background of her life like white noise. But the man who is there only when he chooses to be, who disappears to build, who stays quiet in the face of drama, he lingers in her psyche. She doesn't forget him because she never got enough of him. He left her wanting, and that want becomes a craving, and that craving turns into an obsession, not because he gave her everything, but because he gave her almost nothing, and yet she felt everything. What most men fail to realize is that emotional presence is not the same as emotional impact. You can be present every day and still be forgettable, or you can be scarce, measured, precise, intentional, and leave a deeper imprint than a man who speaks to her 24/7. It's not the quantity of presence that moves her. It's the quality of absence that makes her realize just how much of her mind he still occupies, even when he's not around. And that's the paradox. The man who's there less often becomes the man she thinks about more, because his absence echoes louder than another man's desperate noise ever could. A man who prioritizes himself above all, his purpose, his peace, his principles, is not selfish. He is sovereign, and that sovereignty doesn't repel women, it magnetizes them. Because while the world has trained men to put women first, to cater, to please, to prove their worth through relentless effort and approval seeking, true masculine energy stands in quiet defiance of that narrative. A man who puts himself first is not ignoring her needs. He's communicating that he has his own. And that subtle assertion of self-priority instantly shifts the energetic dynamic. It tells her, you are important, but you're not the center of my universe. And that one statement, spoken through actions, not words, awakens something primal in her, a deep curiosity, a respect, and in many cases, an overwhelming desire to win the attention of the man who refuses to sacrifice himself to earn hers. When a man chooses himself before he chooses her, he creates emotional gravity. She starts to lean in because she can feel that his identity isn't shaped by her presence. He doesn't change his plans just to fit into hers. He doesn't drop his boundaries to accommodate her emotions. He doesn't rush to explain himself when misunderstood, and he doesn't trade his self-respect for temporary affection. That kind of posture, rare and deeply rooted, makes him feel untouchable. Not because he's playing hard to get, but because he truly believes his mission is bigger than her mood. That belief cannot be faked. It radiates through his silence, through his discipline, through the way he says no without guilt or explanation. And she senses it. She senses that he's a man who does not collapse under emotional pressure. He's a man whose attention is expensive, not because he's arrogant, but because he values where it goes. Self-priority also speaks to a level of emotional discipline that is extremely rare. Most men are reactive. They lose themselves in attraction. They chase, they adjust, they compromise too early and too much, just for the illusion of connection. But the man who refuses to betray himself in order to be chosen sends a much louder message. I choose me first. And that superiority, yes, superiority is not about ego. It's about hierarchy. Because in any romantic dynamic, one person leads and the other follows. And leadership, in its purest form, starts with the ability to lead oneself. She cannot follow you if you don't lead your own life. She cannot admire you if you don't have something greater than her that you're committed to. A man who self-prioritizes signals to her that he is not emotionally dependent, that he's already full, that his cup is not empty and searching for her to pour into it. And that fullness, that emotional abundance makes him stand out in a sea of men still trying to earn identity through romantic validation. There is also something incredibly grounding about a man who prioritizes his time, his mental clarity, his goals, and his energy over emotional drama. He doesn't rush to fix everything. He doesn't panic when she pulls away. He doesn't drop everything to be at her emotional service. Not because he doesn't care, but because he understands something most men don't. To be respected, you must first respect yourself enough to put yourself first. And when a woman sees that you're not putting her on a pedestal, when she realizes that your world isn't revolving around her feelings, her schedule, her expectations, that's when she starts revolving around you. She starts checking herself before she oversteps. She starts investing more because she knows your presence isn't guaranteed. She starts admiring you not for your compliments, but for your consistency, for your standards, for your ability to walk away from anything, even her, if it costs you your peace or your power. This is where real masculine superiority begins, not in domination, but in non-attachment, in the unwavering self-focus that refuses to be negotiated. When a woman watches you choose your growth over her comfort, your vision over her chaos, your silence over her emotional storms, she doesn't think less of you. She thinks more. Because now she knows she can't control you. She can't own you. She can't predict you. And what she can't control, she learns to respect. And what she begins to respect, she slowly becomes addicted to without even realizing it. There is a quiet dominance in a man who knows when not to speak, a stillness that says more than any confession, argument, or explanation ever could. Silence, when wielded with control, becomes a language more potent than persuasion. While most men rush to speak, trying to prove, clarify, defend, or beg for understanding, the man who chooses silence over reaction communicates something far more magnetic, unshakable inner strength. He isn't avoiding the conversation. He's elevating himself above the need to participate in emotional chaos. And that shift creates an energy that is instantly felt, especially by women who are used to emotional responses. His silence is not absence, it's power. It's the bold refusal to let his peace be hijacked by temporary emotion. And in that refusal, she is forced to feel the weight of his presence in a way that words could never deliver. When a woman is emotionally charged, testing boundaries, or even intentionally provoking, most men collapse. They defend, they explain, they try to smooth things over with endless dialogue. But the man who remains still, who listens without reacting, who observes without interrupting, who processes without pleading, disrupts the script she's used to, and that disruption rewires her perception of him. She starts to feel his depth. She senses that he's not emotionally impulsive, that he doesn't seek connection through approval, that his identity isn't shaped by her reaction. Silence in this context becomes spiritual. It creates a pause that forces her to confront her own behavior, her own words, her own emotions, without the buffer of his verbal validation. And that internal confrontation births reflection. Reflection leads to respect. Because while most men try to fix the problem by talking it to death, he fixes it by giving it space to reveal itself without interference. Silence is also the ultimate test of discipline. It's easy to speak. It's easy to vent. It's easy to lash out or even pour out affection, hoping to rescue the dynamic. But it takes immense self-mastery to choose silence, not as a weapon, but as a declaration. My energy is not available for emotional theatrics. And that standard sets a tone. It creates a boundary. It tells her that while her emotions are valid, they will not dictate his state. It's not about indifference. It's about emotional maturity. A man who can remain silent in the face of pressure is not emotionally disconnected. He's in control. He's not refusing to engage. He's refusing to self-abandon. And that refusal becomes strangely attractive to her because now she sees a man who cannot be manipulated by tone, by tears, by tension. He responds when it matters, and when it doesn't, he doesn't. There's also a sacred kind of mystery built into silence. When a man doesn't overshare, doesn't narrate his every move, doesn't flood her with constant updates and affirmations, he becomes harder to figure out. And what a woman cannot figure out, she cannot forget. His silence leaves open space for her mind to wander, to question, to imagine. And in that silence, her emotional investment often grows stronger. Why? Because silence is not emptiness, it's depth. And depth, when unspoken, creates gravity. It draws her in without a single word being said. That quiet space becomes the echo chamber for all the emotions she wasn't expecting to feel. And the absence of constant reassurance from him forces her to search within herself for answers, answers that usually lead her back to him. In arguments, silence also asserts a kind of psychological leadership. the one who controls their voice, controls the room. He doesn't chase understanding. He doesn't fight to be heard. He doesn't beg to be seen. He simply holds space. That kind of energy is rare. It's unsettling to someone used to chaos. It's frustrating to someone trying to provoke. And it's deeply attractive to someone subconsciously craving masculine grounding. Because while words can be manipulated, twisted, used against you, silence remains untouchable. It cannot be argued with. It cannot be misquoted. It doesn't need validation. It just exists, unmoved, undeniable, and deeply respected by anyone attuned to real power. And when a woman experiences that from a man, when she feels the force of his non-reaction, the quiet strength of his inner stillness, she starts realizing that this man is not like the others. He doesn't seek to be understood. He doesn't demand emotional comfort. He doesn't argue for his worth. He simply embodies it through presence and restraint, making his silence echo louder than the loudest declaration ever could. There is nothing more psychologically piercing to a woman than a man's indifference. Not cruelty, not rejection, not even rage, just that cold, unwavering detachment that communicates, you are no longer emotionally relevant to me, because while attention fuels ego, indifference starves it. And once the ego is starved, self-reflection becomes inevitable. Most women are accustomed to emotional engagement, even if it's messy, reactive, or tense. They're used to being felt, responded to, pursued, even criticized, because all of that still validates their emotional impact. But when a man becomes genuinely indifferent, not as a tactic, but as a byproduct of outgrowing the emotional pull, something far more powerful occurs. He becomes a mirror. Not because he reflects her back to herself, but because his absence of interest forces her to see her own behavior, her own patterns, and the emotional weight of her choices, not from his mouth, but from his silence. Indifference is not the same as pretending not to care. Pretending is rooted in ego, in the hope of being chased, but real indifference doesn't seek a reaction. It doesn't want closure. It doesn't need her to understand or feel guilty or even miss him. It simply means the emotional connection has been severed to a point where her validation no longer moves him. Her words no longer shake him. Her presence no longer disrupts his rhythm. And this kind of detachment isn't loud. It's not declared. It's not thrown in her face. It shows up in the way he doesn't reply with urgency, in the way he no longer corrects her, in how he doesn't ask where she's been, and most notably in how he seems emotionally full without her. That fullness, uncentered around her, destabilizes her perception of power, because now there is nothing left for her to manipulate, to guilt trip, or to fix. Most women don't begin to reflect until their words stop working, until their actions no longer get a response, until the man who once used to overanalyze, question, or beg for clarity suddenly says nothing at all. And in that nothingness, their mind starts spinning. What changed? Why isn't he fighting anymore? Has he moved on? Did I go too far? Was I really the one causing all the drama? This is the psychology of reflection. It doesn't happen when someone's defending themselves. It happens when there's no one left to fight with, when a woman can't provoke a man anymore, when her chaos is met with calm, when her silence is met with silence, when her games are met with stillness. She begins turning inward, not because she wants to, but because she has no other emotional outlet. His indifference has become a wall she can't scale, and on the other side of that wall is her own accountability. A man's indifference, when rooted in true self-respect, is the most powerful form of nonverbal communication. It says, I've seen enough, I've felt enough, and now I'm choosing me. And that choice has a ripple effect. Not only does it cut off her supply of emotional control, but it also forces her to reevaluate her own role in the disconnect. Without him around to absorb her projections, she has to sit with them. Without his attention to distract her from herself, she has to look inward. And in that solitude, without his emotional energy to lean on, she either evolves or repeats. But this time, she does it without him. That shift is profound. Because now the man is no longer in the emotional equation. He's not waiting, watching, or hoping for change. He's already changed by reclaiming his energy, his focus, his peace. Indifference is also the final boundary. It's the one thing a woman cannot argue against. She can push back against criticism. She can manipulate guilt. She can respond to attention. But she cannot fight silence that isn't performative. She cannot break through a wall that doesn't resist because there's nothing to pull from. And that absence of emotional resistance exposes everything. Her tendencies, her patterns, her role. His indifference no longer feeds her emotional addiction. It shatters it. Not because it intends to, but because it no longer participates in it. And that disconnection triggers the very growth that arguments, explanations, and pleas never could. Because now the only voice left for her to hear is the one inside her own mind. And when a man walks away, not in anger, but in neutrality, his silence becomes the echo chamber for all the questions she never dared to ask herself when his energy was still available to absorb the weight of her unresolved emotions. At the core of this dynamic lies a truth few are willing to accept. Women are not addicted to men who beg, chase, or emotionally unravel to win them over. They become addicted to the ones who don't need to be chosen to feel complete, the ones who move with purpose, not persuasion, who live by standards, not reactions, who walk away when it costs their peace, not when it threatens their ego. These are the men who project value without ever speaking about it, the ones who don't perform masculinity but embody it through silence, through discipline, through detachment, and through absolute emotional self-respect. It is not about pretending to be hard. It is about actually being rooted. It is not about manipulating emotions. It is about not needing them to validate yours. When a man lives with direction, guards his energy, and makes his presence a privilege, not a default, he doesn't need to chase admiration. He becomes the gravity women orbit around, not because he tries, but because he chooses not to try. That choice rewires everything, because ultimately it's not what you give her that makes her addicted. It's what you withhold, not out of cruelty, but out of value. Your time, your energy, your validation, your presence, they are sacred. And when you treat them that way, she will too. Not because you demanded respect, but because you modeled it.